everyone, welcome back to 25 Sweetpeas and welcome to the Christmas 2021 series. Today I'm going to be showing you how to draw this cute little cake in Procreate. All you need to get started is an iPad, an Apple Pencil, and the app Procreate downloaded. So let's go! Okay, it is time to get started. I've got a 3000 by 3000 canvas ready to go, and we're going to start off by changing the color of the background. I'm going to pick kind of like a sandy, creamish color. That way I can actually use white in the design we're going to work on today. Then I'm going to go to my layer panel, rename the first layer to sketch. I'm going to start with the intention of keeping things organized, but you never know how that will work. Next up, I'm going to change to the color that I'm going to sketch in, and I'm also going to change to a pencil-like brush. I'm using the 6B pencil from the drawing box that I have linked in the description box, but the 6B pencil and the default Procreate brush set would be perfectly fine for this, or whatever you prefer to sketch with. And then I'm going to go into drawing guides, turn up the grid all the way, like as big as you can go. That way we can find the center of the canvas. This is like my little trick to finding the center. That way we can make sure our design is actually centered throughout this and kind of use that as a baseline. And of course that will disappear when we turn it off later, so it won't be in the final design. But now we're going to start sketching the cake. In the bottom corner of the screen, you guys can see like the sketch that we're kind of working from, but I'm going to start over here and show it to you guys. So my favorite trick for doing cakes is actually starting with a oval shape, and within that oval shape we're going to do like one. We're going to make it perfect. We're going to go ahead and use that little tool that Procreate has built in that helps us make perfect shapes, and we are going to then kind of duplicate it and pull it down. But first off, right now we're just really just sketching like a rough sketch so we can kind of get an idea of where we want things. This part doesn't have to be proportionate, and we're just gonna go for it. So we're making a single tiered cake with some fun little festive decorations. My screen today has been doing like really weird things, like zooming in and out, so I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure it's up. But I'm just gonna put some like vague shapes here and there to indicate where I want things. Of course, yours does not have to look exactly like mine by any means, but if you do want to, I actually have a step-by-step illustrated guide that you can get by signing up for my email list, which is linked in the description box down below. And there'll be like a step-by-step like line art version of this. Right now, we're basically working on an illustration process, so there is that. Right now I'm now creating like the final sketch, which is going to have the more precise lines. So as you guys can see, I made that oval. I duplicated that layer. I'm going to turn on all of my snappings so I can keep it lined up, and then I'm going to pull it down and make it the bottom of the cake, kind of just pull it down directly underneath. Once I have done that, I'm going to add another layer on top of that, squish the two like the top and the bottom of the cake together, and on the layer on top of that I'm going to go ahead and connect the two. So I'm doing this on a separate layer so that way I can actually go in and erase the back side of the bottom of the cake, which will make sense as you guys see it. I'm really not great at explaining things, but that's why I'm doing 12 Days of Christmas, so I can get better at it. And I feel like a lot of these things, like as you look at it, you can kind of catch on and see what's going on. See, I'm going to go back to the layer with the circles, and I'm going to erase this back part of the cake. That way, you know, now it actually looks like a cake, not like some model of a shape. And for my eraser, I am just using one of the traditional airbrush brushes that is a default in Procreate. I like to do it because it gets clean edges and I can get it pretty big and get a lot erased at one time. But of course, there are ways that you can make it like match your pencil line, but right now we're just working on a sketch, and it doesn't need to be perfect. So now that our cake is all on the same layer, I have added another layer on top of it, and we are going to put the guidelines in for the icing. I kind of went with it on this part. I kind of did like swirly bits. We're going to use like 3 different colors for this part, so we want to divide it obviously with 2 lines, then you've got 3 different areas we can color. Then after that, I put in some star snowflake like shapes in the original design that this is a part of for the 12 Days of Christmas. It kind of has like these white stars that you can color, or you can turn them into snowflakes, whatever you fancy. This is the fun part where you can get creative with it, and you definitely don't need to follow this part to a T. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and start sketching on the little Christmas trees or winter trees on top. I'm kind of doing them in layers to kind of create some depth, and we can also like put some snow on there, which is again why I wanted my background of this whole piece to not be white, so we could actually use white in the design and it'd be rather obvious. And we're also going to add some like snow onto the top of the cake, so you can kind of just put in some indicator lines so you don't forget. But after all of that is done, you're going to pinch those together and create them all into one layer, and that is going to become your main sketch layer. So you can get rid of the first one that was sloppy, just trying to get the placement of everything. And for your final sketch, you can go center it using those guidelines that we already turned on from the drawing guide. And I like to turn my sketches onto the multiply blend mode and turn the opacity down. And then I like to put a new layer underneath my sketch. That way I can work underneath the sketch, see my guidelines, and work from there. And then of course turn it on and off to check different things, and it just makes it easy to see my sketch lines rather than drawing and coloring on top of them, if that makes any sense. Hopefully it does. But now it is time to start coloring. So for this design, I'm going to go ahead and use the same sketching brush as well as the ink brush. My favorite ink brush actually comes from a brush set that I have purchased off of Design Cuts. It's called Storybook Studio, and it is very similar to the default ink brush in Procreate, so you're welcome to use that one. The one that I'm using has a bit more of a different like tip end, I guess you could say, and I really like that, which is why I prefer to use that one. But of course you do already have an ink brush that is very similar, so feel free to use that. But I will go ahead and link the brush pack that I purchased that has this brush in it, because I do love this version of it. So I've decided to go with an overall pink cake. Now I am not going to be like super precise on this one, because the bottom part of the cake doesn't really have to be, but we're going to kind of use this as our overall base. So I'm going to go ahead and color it all pink, but it's not all going to stay pink. We're going to utilize a clipping mask later and change that. But the thing about this brush is that it is really nice and textured. Oh goodness, I don't know what my iPad is doing today. It's like going in and out. So sorry about that. I'm going to redo that line. This ink brush is what I was saying, and it has a really nice sort of texture to it. So even when you're like coloring in the area fully, like it's still gonna have some textures involved, which I really like. And the one thing that I've tried to do for this 12 Days of Christmas series is try to use brushes that there are comparatives to that are already built into Procreate, so nobody feels like they have to go out and buy a specific brush. Granted, the ink brush is still one of my favorites that I have purchased, so I'm going to share it below. But I wanted to find something that you guys would already have, so the ink brush that is built in at Procreate is still a really good option. And it allows you to cover a lot of ground, so to speak, whenever you're coloring in. As you guys can see, I have it almost as large as I can, but I wanted a little bit under so I could be really careful on the edges. So we're just going to do that. Sometimes I find when I'm coloring in a lot, it's easier to turn off the sketch and just color in the area. Ooh, there you can see that texture. See what I mean? It has kind of reminds you of like when you're working with watercolor and you sprinkle salt on it and you get that neat reaction. This brush kind of has that, but in a more controlled way, and also kind of looks more like a colored pencil finish. So it's very nice and full, but also textured, and that's why I really like it. So we're going to finish coloring this in. Okay, once you've got the cake all filled in, it's really good to turn your sketch back on and make sure you've got everything in the right lines and such. Once that is done, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the alpha lock for the layer that my cake is on, and I'm going to keep the same color that I've got, and I'm going to go and play with the saturation and brightness a little bit. So I'm going to turn up the saturation and turn the brightness down a bit so I can get a darker shade of the same exact color. And here I am going to go ahead and kind of outline the cake and give it that side edge that was not in the colored version, that we're only seeing the sketch version. And then I'm going to go in with the same brush and blend it all together. That way we can give our cake some definition and make it look like it's actually, you know, a cake shape and rounded. Plus we need to get that front edge of the cake so we can decorate the top. Because before it just kind of looked like a pink shape. And right now we're just kind of like blending that out. And because we have the alpha lock on, it's all going to stay in the shape that we already created, which is super helpful. And we don't have to worry about staying in the lines because that's one of the great things. Who likes to stay in the lines? Okay, I think that's about good. I keep going. Just kind of basically keep doing this until you're happy with it and you feel like it's looking more like a shape. You don't have to worry about the back edge so much of the cake because we're going to be adding things on top, but you definitely want to make sure you get the front sides and that front layer of the cake. So once that is done, it is time to add another layer. And on this one, we're going to start giving some of the cake details. So you need to pick your icing colors for the base of the cake. I wanted to go with a turquoise shade for one, and I'll probably do red for the other. And I'm going to use a clipping mask. So whatever I do on this layer is going to stay on the cake and not go out of the lines, but I don't have to think about it. And now I'm going to follow my little swirly guides, and I've got my first turquoise band here. And now it is time to fill it in. And again, I am still using the ink brush. For most of these designs, I'm going to try to keep it simple and only use 1 to 2, maybe 3 brushes. And we're going to fill that in. And similarly to what we did on the cake, after we are done filling in this turquoise part, we're going to go into the color panel, and turn up the saturation and turn down the brightness just the teeniest bit so we can add some shading to this, because while this is like maybe a fondant or an icing, it is higher off the cake than obviously the cake icing is, so we want to give it some definition on the edges and make sure that it doesn't look flat. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and add another layer, and we're going to make it have a clipping mask, and we're again going to put the bottom layer of icing and fill that in. I actually went ahead and put it behind the turquoise layer in general, so I didn't have to be super precise about the top line of it, and kind of just fill in the bottom half of the cake. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to go and add depth details to these, and I'm turning up the saturation a teeny bit and turning down the brightness a little bit to deepen the color that we're already working with for the red. And I'm just adding some definition on the edges, and then I'm using my smudging tool and I'm blending it together. And don't forget the edges of the cake, because that's what's going to help make the cake look round and not 100% flat. Plus, on the bottom of the cake, you might have more of a shadow because we are going to see the top of the cake. So once I've done the red part, I'm going to go ahead and go back to the turquoise and do that, which I already described. It is helpful to go ahead and turn on the alpha lock on that layer. That way, whatever you do stays within that layer, so within your turquoise. And again, I'm doing the edges. I'm going to do the top a little bit. And then I'm going to smudge it out with the smudging tool, which I already have set to my inking brush. Next up, it is time to go add some color behind the turquoise. So because the turquoise is above the pink, we need to go back in and add some darker pink behind the turquoise to make it have that little bit of depth back there. So I'm going to use another layer mask, a clipping mask, and do that on top of the pink with a darker shade. And now it is time to add a layer on top of all of our layers, and it is time to add the little details to the cake. So now I've actually switched back to the 6B pencil, and I'm just going to create some star shapes. So this pencil particularly has a very nice flat edge, so I'm just going to move around my canvas and put like this little star or snowflake depending on what you want it to be, and it's very much just like an asterisk. And I'm going to do about 2 of those. You could go crazy and do 3 or 4 if you wanted. Once I am done with those, I'm also going to add in some little circles, which maybe they're little cool sprinkles or just little circles of icing. Who knows? But they're really fun and it makes the cake fun. Sorry my hand gets in the way in this. It's kind of hard to capture that one. And on this, I'm not using like the major circling tool. I'm just kind of winging it. And if they look wonky, it's probably more realistic that way because you'd have to do that with icing or something. So next up, I'm going to go add another layer, but I'm going to put it underneath what we just did. That way I can kind of create a shadow behind them. So for this layer, I'm going to use like my finger and color pick the colors that we've already used and turn on a multiply blend mode for this layer. And we're going to work back behind it to kind of just give some shadows. I'm going to go ahead and do all the pinks while I still have the pink as my color. Then I'm going to pick the turquoise. And since this layer is a multiply blend layer, everything's going to have a nice darker tone to it, and we don't have to worry about picking a different shade. And lastly, the red one. Okay, now that we've got that done, I'm gonna go ahead and grab the Gaussian blur and give that a little bit of a blur. Very, very small percent, like 2 to 4%, I would say, just to kind of help give a not such a harsh shadow. Now we're going to go ahead and add another layer, and this layer is going to be on top of everything that we have done previously. I'm going to change my color back to white, which you can do by double tapping in the top corner of the circle in your color guide. And we're going to start adding some snow to the top of the cake. Again, I am using the 6B pencil. And I'm just kind of winging it. And it's not going to be the whole entire top of the cake, but I kind of want it to be centered around the trees. Make a little snow drifts. Although I would much rather prefer sand drifts. And I want some snow to show up behind the trees. We're going to do that. And so for this layer, we're going to be grabbing green and we're going to start illustrating our trees. I'm going to go ahead and do it all as green, and then if we want to add snow later, we will do that. But I found that it was really helpful to just put a straight line in the middle of where you want your trees to be, so you kind of use this as a guideline. Of course, you're going to draw over this and it's not going to mean anything, but it's really helpful for this part so you can kind of see where the center of things need to be, because I don't know about you guys, but I struggle with drawing things that are triangular and making them look equal on both sides. But I definitely found this to be super helpful, even though, as you guys can see, I'm still redoing it multiple times, because the bottom layer we want to be kind of wavy, and that way you can kind of create, you know, the texture more so of a realistic-ish pine tree. And I'm just gonna fill that in, and again, like I said earlier, we're gonna go in with white and a darker green to add some depth to this to make it look a bit more realistic. Granted, this is a probably made out of fondant or something, maybe even a cookie, and we're putting it on the top of a cake, so it's not meant to look like a super real tree. We kind of wanted to make it look like it was made out of icing or something to that effect. But I did about 4 layers on this tree, as you guys can see, and it's already way too far down the cake, so we'll have to fix that later. And then I'm going to do about 4 layers on this other tree, but they're going to be much tighter in towards the center of the line, and just overall they just have a little bit of a smaller composition. Definitely feel free to move your canvas around however you guys want. Sometimes I see people and they never move their canvas, and I'm just like, I can't do that. Even if I was drawing in a notebook or sketchbook or something, I move around the papers. So as I can tell, these trees are definitely not far enough up, but before we address that, I'm going to go ahead and turn on an alpha lock. I'm going to grab a bigger, a charcoal pencil, and I'm going to turn my green down in brightness and up in saturation, just so I can add a little bit of shadowing on the different layers. I just like love how that instantly made it look a bit more something special, something different and unique, and not so flat, even though, like I said, it's probably made out of fondant. I'm gonna go ahead and do that to both trees. Wow, that really helped. It looks so much better now. Remember to follow the wavy like action so you still get that nice texture in the layers of your tree. And go ahead and add some like strokes of the texturedness within the body of the tree. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and add the snow on top. I'm also going to go ahead and use like a rather textured charcoaly brush and go in with white. And just like maybe it's sticking to the edges of the branches. And maybe there's some snow buildup on the top. I'm not sure. I don't like it. You know, that's the great thing about Procreate is that you don't have to commit to a certain design. You can kind of try something, and if you don't like it, you can kind of start over, and it's like non-destructive. So definitely remember doing things on different layers. Even though it's intimidating and having multiple layers, it can be really, really nice because it allows you to get creative and try things that you otherwise wouldn't, because you would be afraid that there was no going back afterwards. Okay, we're getting close. I really like how the snow looks on this little tree. And big one. Okay, so now we're going to go to the layer panel and we're going to pull all three of those layers together so we can move all of them together. The snapping was pulling too much for me, so I went and turned those off, and now I've kind of put those onto the top of the cake where I liked. And I'm going to go actually underneath all of those layers, grab the pink color of the cake again, and turn on a multiply blend mode, and kind of give the snow a little bit of a shadow. Yeah, that really makes it look like it's sitting on the cake. I like how that worked. Okay, guys, we're getting close. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually like add some shadows into the snow. So what I did was I just changed my color to white, and then I pulled the brightness down a little bit to give it a bit of a gray tone. And I'm just adding that into the snow area to give a little bit of like textured and shadowiness. I'm going to do the same right here above next to the trees. Now I have pulled in a new layer and I took it underneath everything we're done, and I think it's just time to add some texture to the background of this overall piece to finish it up so that way it doesn't look so flat. So I'm actually going to go ahead and make my brush the color of the background. And then I'm going to turn the multiply blend mode on that very first layer and just add a little bit of a shadow underneath the cake to pretend like it's like sitting on a surface. Then I'm going to smudge it out to make it look a bit more natural, even though obviously we're not on a real surface. We're just kind of doing a spot illustration today. But once that is done, I'm going to go ahead and add another layer, turn on the multiply blend mode, and let's grab this really nice textured spattering brush from the Gladys Things shop. MAC does some really great brushes, which I will link MAC's the Gladys Things brush set below too. And we're gonna just add a few bits of those, and then we are done. It added some nice texture in the background. And here is a look at the entire piece. You guys, we just created this really, really fun wintry cake, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and I would love some feedback on what you guys thought of this video. This is obviously the first of many to come, and I'm kind of like learning how to do these videos and just kind of like the whole flow of them. So feel free to let me know what you guys would like to see differently in the future videos, or parts that you'd like me to elaborate on, and just all the things like that. So yeah, feel free to let me know down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I look forward to doing more videos like this in the very near future. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye!